This is Phantom Electric Ghost. We're live on the air with Eric G, author, writer, life coach, and you're a founder. You're a founder of the Utopia Project website. So thank you and welcome to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, great. Thank you for having me.
Want to let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newslead Network. You might see that icon up there. If you want to check out that network for podcast, it's audio only. You can check that out for free using the coupon code GHOST. We also have your utopiaproject.com URL that will be fully clickable when you check out the description on any of the podcast um, channels that we're on. We're on multiple channels, and you can check that out later. And we'll talk more about your project. One of the first things we ever ask anybody's on the show is what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
In terms of in general or in terms of the life coaching?
Well, like you can decide if it's the life coaching you want to focus on. You might want to take it from that point of
Oh,
view.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I was going to say in general, it's just like having fun and doing things that I enjoy. I think my brother summed me up perfectly one time when he said, if it takes longer than 15 minutes and Eric doesn't want to do it, then it's not going to be done. So like, it's like taxes, right? No one wants to do their taxes and they take longer than 15 minutes. So I'm just like, okay, I got to give it to someone else to do because I'm not going to do it.
Do that.
Yeah. In terms of life coaching though, like I think growing up, I think we're taught that a lot of the differences that we see are so external. Like, it's like our race or our ethnicity or our gender or whatever, like the way our culture that we're brought up in. But then you always see these anomalies, right? People grow up like in Japan, Japanese culture tends to not focus on physical contact. But then you have a lot of people who maybe want a big hug. And you're like, wait, so are they weird or are they different? And so what motivated me growing up was I felt like a different personality that didn't always relate to what I was seeing on television. And so I tried to figure out, well, what's the problem? Am I the problem? And that's what got me studying personality and personality typing and understanding different kinds of people. And so now what motivates me is to try to spread the word. I work with a lot of students or young students. I don't want to say children because I feel like that infantilizes them, but I work with a lot of young people. And I feel like there's a lot of tension there sometimes with what they see on television. They want to be something different than they're not. So what motivates me is making sure that they know that they're okay and it's going to be fine and just be confident in who they are and grow within themselves.
I think it's really important because we have so many influences now because of social media, and then we're attached to our phones, and people are getting pinged all day about like idealized visions of what things should be or what they perceive things the way things should be. And if you're a young person, that can really kind of cripple you or really affect you in a negative way. If you're not if you're I'm a child of the '70s, and we kind of dealt with the bullying at that level. But now you're getting bullied like every 5 seconds.
Right.
Like
The bullies are
that's
like, yeah.
everywhere.
Before it was like the way you dressed in person, and now it's like the likes or the lack of likes you're getting on your Instagram because people think you dress like trash or whatever.
Yeah, it's just trying to understand how you fit in. And I mean, I studied sociology as my major, and you're talking about the microcosm and the macrocosm and anatomy. And I've always been very interested in the social condition from like that kind of group dynamic. But you're more like on an individual basis, or do you actually see how it aligns to groups within society?
My big thing is seeing how I always say like the culture that you grow up doesn't necessarily dictate your personality, but it dictates how your personality deals within that culture. Right. So I have a friend who, he's one of the different personality types. I don't want to get too into it now, but he's a personality type that doesn't necessarily like physical contact. He's just kind of like, respect my personal space. Yeah. Just respect my personal space. But, he's Cuban. So he's always like, dude, when I go to parties and it's just like everyone's trying to hug me, and which is different than the cultural difference I mentioned before about growing up in Japan, and it's just interesting because, everyone in any culture says, oh, our culture loves to eat. And that's where it got me, where you watch enough food shows, every culture will say, oh, we're a culture that loves to eat. And then you're
Everybody
like,
loves to eat.
I think everybody loves to eat, right? Now, some people within that culture don't really care. Like my mom would be fine eating a Subway sandwich every day. She doesn't care what she's eating. But there, a lot of people in the culture, like to eat, and that just translates to everywhere. So
I think it can does it do actually translate to, like, the type of food they love to eat and the kinda connection of the culture
Mm.
to the food, and maybe they're making that kinda statement, but they really mean a lot more than what they just said.
Right. Yeah, it's probably, they're making the connection like we are Scandinavian, so we eat this way. It's like, well, maybe more so it's because of like obviously the biome you live in, right? Like if you live
Yeah,
in big countries that have all these different like climates, then you're gonna have lots of different food just because there's lots of different resources. I mean,
yeah,
more
it's just
so
the
than people.
the cuisine and the level of, like, are you, Americans like, "Oh, I go to McDonald's," you see an Italian, "I'm gonna make my own meal. I'm
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
I'm gonna cook that sauce all day." And
Hmm.
Americans, "Well, I'll just go out and get it from somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna care about, like, trying to actually craft it." S you
Yeah.
know?
And I will stand up for America, though. I think America, we have the best food in the entire world because, obviously we're a country where there's so many
Hodgepodge.
people. Yeah, it's a hodgepodge. So you're gonna get like great
We
stuff.
get everything. Like,
Yeah.
you do, like, whatever, because we have so multicultural.
Mhm.
You
Oh
have
yeah.
taco night, you can have Italian night, you can sushi night, you can, like, go to everything. You can go to, wherever there's so many different influences depending on which coast you're on. Like,
Oh,
you can
100%.
get into a lot of different things depending on where you are. But, it's interesting, in that you talked about this idea of typing and how you've been able to actually work with a lot of corporations, a lot of companies that you kind of name check that were very interested in your typing.
Right.
And
Mhm.
how did they actually utilize that, or how did you pitch that to them, or did they find you?
It's funny. It was through a person, like obviously a friend that I knew, and it was specific to software engineering within the company. So it wasn't specifically like on a broad level, Disney or Hulu, but I worked with specific groups within the back end of their websites. And let's face it, the stereotypical software engineer doesn't always have the best people skills. Like, I mean, you're not going to really see a whole lot of people if you're coding and you're behind a computer. And I'm painting a wide brush. I'm sure as I met, there are a lot of people who are very social, but it was useful for them because I taught more so like, this is what motivates this person, and what motivates this person might not necessarily be what motivates you. It might not be your value. And it's especially important for supervisors and managers because they need to know, like on a pragmatic level, at the end of the day, you can't try to force people to value the same things that you do, especially at work. You're just like, at the end of the day, I just wanted to be productive. So whatever is the most efficient, if I can just get them to do it, that way I can get this person to
Wherever you
do it.
want.
All these different
Yeah.
people that I have to worry about, right? Like you can't like try to change anyone. You really shouldn't change anyone anyway. But
Well, that's interesting because, like, a lot of times within the corporate grind or the structure, there's, like, like inside the cube, like the in the box type of thinking. And as
oh,
everybody says, they don't want to have in the box. But every corporate culture has their kind of idealized employee, or what they think their performance standards are, and they kind of fit a certain archetype. But they'll tell
right.
you that they really don't want that. But then everything they're doing is kind of going toward that.
Yeah. I mean, in my personality types, there's definitely certain personality types that are more plentiful. And so they make up about half the population, approximately. So their values definitely tend to get pushed, I would say, on more people. And it's definitely what you think of like dutiful, responsible, organized, structured, part of society, polite, that kind of mentality. And let's face it, not everybody is like that. Not everyone values that, you know.
Mhm.
Um,
Especially sometimes, if you have like the bell curve, right?
mhm.
Sometimes your creative people are on the edges of the bell curve. They're not in the middle at all.
Right,
And
right.
you want that type of creative person, but they don't fit the paradigm of the perfect or the good, like, worker. Like, they might do their best work at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
They might do their best work when they're not in the office. They might come up with their ideas. And so if you're trying to put them in a box based on, oh, you need to be here at 5 or 7 and stay in the
Mhm.
cube and take your breaks on time, is like, well, they're not going to fit that paradigm. But
Yeah, I mean,
you
they
actually
might
need their capability, but you don't know how to reach that kind of person.
they might be a jerk, and not excusing jerks, but what I mean by that is they might not necessarily have great social skills. They might
Yeah, they
they
usually
might be
don't.
so focused. Yeah, they might be so focused on their work and they have different values, it's not really important what other people think. And you kind of want to use that and pull that together and not try to make them different, because I'm a big believer that our personalities dictate a lot of our strengths, but then our strengths also dictate our weaknesses and vice versa there. One man's organized is another man's rigid. Like one woman's spontaneous is another woman's flaky, right? Like those come together, and that's just life.
Because a lot of times when I live in the kind of creative space, I run into a lot of people who are neurodivergent, autistic, and it tends to be very common in the creative space, whether you're an artist or an actor. And there's a lot of quirks. There's a lot of potential issues. Like, well, this person really doesn't fit with people that well, but they have really good capabilities that they can do for like this thing they can do, but they can't do that all day. They do that for that one thing they're going to do, and then the rest of the day they're kind of hard to deal with. And you're like, okay, well, how do we actually deal with that?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I think a majority of people have a very linear approach, but oftentimes, in the creative world, it's not a linear approach. The linear approach is fairly safe because obviously what's coming up next on the line. But let's face it, the creative profession is not always that way. So thus, people who don't take that linear approach tend to like float into the creative profession or sectors where they can do projects and do things that are not always like whatever.
Yeah, gig work. You end up being like, I can't do the 9 to 5. I can do the gig project work. This like project or thing by different events by each one that comes along, but it's hard to be sustainable at a certain, like, I can't be on the assembly line type of work.
I
can't be in the cubicle type of work. And there's a lot of capability now because the way the world is, where now people can do kind of like their own thing. They can create their own businesses. They have their own, a lot of these micro entrepreneur levels where they're able to actually, have that Etsy shop or have that gig work on, any of these services and just do it as they are capable of.
Yeah. I mean, even back in the day, right? Like there's a reason why we have like crabs and lobster and stuff, is because they're people who go out into the middle of the ocean and work for like 3 months in like the most extreme conditions, and then they go home and don't work for the next 9 months. And it's all part, like there are people who work from 3 a.m. to the graveyard shift that we may not see all the time, but that's part of life too. And so my whole thing is appreciating that we don't always have to do the same thing.
So what makes your typing methodology like different than other types of methodologies? What makes yours unique?
I would say the biggest difference is that a lot of times the other typing methodologies tend to focus on what people can see. I know introversion, extroversion is a really big thing. I know there's tons of books on like, oh, introvert, you're not that bad, even though you're an introvert. And I'm always just like, well, that's like kind of like a simplistic way to look at it. Like if you're just looking at what you see in front and you're not thinking about the reason why people do the things they do, then you're not really getting the full picture. I think, we can see like a basketball player. You can have multiple basketball players in the NBA all doing it for different reasons. Like I'd imagine Shaquille O'Neal, the reason why he played basketball is different than the reason Kobe Bryant played basketball. And that's probably why they clashed a bit. They just have different personalities, right? And so the same thing is true. So in my personality typing methodology, I focus on like people's core values. And my philosophy is that people have different core values. And I think that sometimes is hard for people to accept, because I think we can accept like differences on the superficial level. Like I come from a different culture. I'm a different gender. I like this kind of food and you like this kind of food. You're organized and I'm spontaneous. I think we accept those differences. But I think if you were to tell someone, oh, I know you value your family, but I don't really value my family more than this, they would probably go, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with you.
Moral judgments come in.
Yeah. And I'm like, when's the last time we heard about Einstein's family? Like when did anyone talk about that? It's like, and he had a daughter and he wasn't a particularly good father. And while that might not have been great for her as a civilization, we have all benefited from him being a bad dad.
The idea that you've got to be the perfect like family person doesn't always fit into like your your place in the universe, like you have multiple roles as a person.
Mhm.
You know, you could, you have different roles, and in certain roles you might fall flat of the expectation. In other places, if you're kind of like a really extreme level like person, that you have certain talent and all your energy, like Einstein went to that.
Mhm.
So he was kind of didn't have any left for his own family, and that can happen. That happens. You see it in, with actors, artists,
Oh
creative
yeah.
people. You could see it with a CEO. If he spends all his time on the company, his family might not be too happy with him, because he's having problems. He's like he's in therapy. It's like well, I'm putting 99% into the company. That's what it is.
And at the end of the day, it helps if that company helps everyone. Einstein's accomplishments helped all like millions of families all over the globe. So at the end of the day, you just have my philosophy is you have to do what you want to do, and as long as it doesn't hurt anyone, and as
Mhm.
long as it's true to yourself, then it's generally gonna end up okay. Because at the end of the day, you're
Which
talking about families. Like a lot of I work with a lot of parents and students, and I do feel like a lot of parents think that they need to spend more time with their kids than they actually should, because most kids all kids always lie to their parents, right? And parents are always saying, "Oh, my kid doesn't lie to me." I'm like, okay, yeah, you're the first parent who's never lied. I'm like, most kids don't really want to spend that much time with their parents at the end of the day. They're just like, okay, like feed me, say hi to me, give me a home place to live, and talk to me
in
for
some
maybe 30
space.
minutes. Yeah. And then after that, I just want to hang out and play like Fortnite with my friends.
Well,
Right.
yeah, it's just kind of space. You can't like it's like micromanaging your kid. Like, everybody at the office hates the micromanager that's coming
Mhm.
by every 15 minutes to see if you're at your desk and see where you are. Like, where are you on that? Like, we asked me like half hour ago. You asked me another hour from now. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
you don't trust me. Like, nobody likes the feeling that you're not being trusted to kind of, you know,
Mhm.
bare minimum. Is like, okay, shouldn't there be some level of acceptance of that? I can
Right.
do it. You don't need to show me every step.
Right. And it's those parents who then get upset when their kids are older, and they're like, I don't understand why they can't make their own decisions. Why can't they like self initiate? Okay, well, I wonder why.
If you don't give them critical thinking skills and you have to come in and override everything, then
Right.
they don't have any way to handle like if you're on you're the captain of the ship. You like if you never had to sail that ship in a bad ocean into
Right.
you suddenly get the bad storm and then you're like, well, I guess this is not gonna we're not gonna make it this time. It's like you have to run into adversity to learn, right?
Yeah, and I think part of it is like going back to personality. When I mentioned a large majority of the population fits a certain personality, and it's great. It's a great personality. It makes our civilization safe and secure and organized and structured. But when your core value is security and safety, sometimes you can go overboard. And I think a lot of times they want certainty, and if they're a parent, then they want to make sure that they are certain that their kids are going to be safe and that they're certain of the outcome. But as we all know, like life has no certainty and life has no certain outcomes, and you can't really control it. And so that is the problem. And of course, we get the results, right, that we have.
You see like that safety trap along with the perfection trap. Like a lot of times, like in the arts, like I could just do what's been done before. But that's
Mhm.
boring to me. Right. So as an artist, I try to push it. Right. So you
Right.
try not to clone you, and when you push it, a lot of times what happens, people really haven't seen that or heard that or looked at that. And the initial response is, oh, we don't like it. And so you have to be willing to kind of take the heat
Mhm.
of that not being accepted or people thinking it's a mistake. And a lot of people are not willing to, they want things to be perfect. They feel unsafe if they're not perfect.
Yeah, which is, once again, in the book, The Power of Personality, I tell this story about, I used to train teachers, and every year we'd have a training session, and I would always bring food to cater it. And this one year, a particular teacher who had more of that safe personality walks up, and she sees falafel, and she's like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's like chickpeas. They grind it up and they deep fry it. That's what it is." And she was like, "Oh, I don't know." And then the person behind her was like, "Oh, that sounds great." And she took two and put them both on her plate. And so the more cautious person was like, "Oh, okay, I'll take one." And she eats it, right? And so 2 years later, same teacher comes up, and she's behind someone else, and the teacher's like, "Oh, what is that?" And so I didn't even have to explain what falafel was, because the previous teacher, who was cautious, was like, "Oh, that's falafel. It's like ground up chickpeas that they deep fry, and it's really good."
Wow.
So it's like they do live in a state of security and safety, and they live in a bubble, but that bubble, you can expand it. That's the beauty of it. You can expand it extremely large to fit a lot of things. You just have to do it a certain way. And once she had her friend try it, then she was like, "Okay, that's like my security blanket. Let me try it."
Oh
And I
yeah.
I'm sure you find out music
The
and you keep chances. Mhm.
permission structure, like there's a, who allows you to kind of, what is it that allows you to kind of, investigate or explore outside of your comfort zone?
Mhm.
Because the idea, like treading water, to some artists, the treading water is the thing. They will purposely kind of it seems like sabotage, right? They'll, like a guy like Bowie. Bowie would create a character like the
Oh,
when
Ziggy
he
Stardust, or
Ziggy, like Ziggy. He created Ziggy. He could have stayed in Ziggy and made millions of dollars, and then he would, oh, Ziggy's done, going into Thin White Duke. Nobody heard that before. Nobody, he stretched himself. He would change characters and go into areas totally different genre. And you're like, why would you do that? And he actually had a comment where he said, as an artist, I don't feel good unless I'm kind of treading water,
Mm,
where I feel like I don't know everything about this. And I
right,
feel better about trying something different. And not everybody's into that kind of adventure, you
right.
know, that they're like, wow, that's too scary for me.
There are certain personality types that, obviously, it's not that majority that like caution or safety and security. There's a third of the population actually seeks like that excitement, that kind of feeling of being on a roller coaster. You're like, am I safe? I don't know if I'm safe. I feel like very unsafe, and that excites them. And that oftentimes they are artists, right? Because you have to take chances, and they're not taking chances just to take chances. It's that feeling of like, I'm not so sure about it, but I like it. I like that
Kind of
feeling.
makes you feel alive. It's like that kind of
Right.
feeling, like if you would adventure, you don't just stay in the house. You go into you seek things. You
Right.
do something beyond your ability. Try to climb that mountain. You try to, you know, go and swim further than you ever did. The things that push yourself. And you're like,
Mhm.
it's not always safe to do that, but you have to have a certain level of ability to kind of believe in yourself. And there's like, if there's a lot of doubt, you're not even gonna try that. Like if you have self-doubt and you
Mhm.
have imposter syndrome, you're never gonna really try to push the envelope.
And it's not even just in in the creative field. I feel like in sales, it's the same thing. Like things where you have to start your own business, which is creative, but it's when people have to hustle, there's that feeling of like, you know what, I might work my hardest today and I might not get anything out of it. Or sports, right? People like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna spend my whole life preparing to be a great basketball player, and then they play at the lowest level of college, and that's as high as they can get. But the cool
Mhm.
thing is that personality can translate to other things. Like former athletes tend to make pretty good salespeople and entrepreneurs, because of that same mentality of like, nothing's guaranteed, but I like it that way. I'm gonna hustle, and once I do hustle, then I should be rewarded. But
That's interesting because like maybe we could talk about the pop psychology of like of the different ideas. I know you talked about extroverts, like introverts, but like alpha, beta. People always talk about type A. What are your
Mhm.
opinions about like that?
you know, I, I don't, because the type A people are thinking of it, always comes from that dichotomy of the personality types that want security and safety. So their type A is, so type A for them is someone who's confident and aggressive and in making things feel organized and secure. So, but I don't necessarily associate that as also a strength. Sometimes it's okay to be strength, because I think we think of type A, we think of strength and pushing your way forward, but there's lots of different ways to get your way. Einstein got his way and got made his mark on society, and he's a pacifist, and he's
Yeah,
as, I don't want to say effeminate, but kind of like, like he is as the least aggressive person you could think of. And
yeah,
a lot of our society revolves around his ideas. So he clearly had whatever his aggression or whatever his mindset pushed on the society as we know it.
yeah.
Um,
Sometimes you can come in an approach of like more psychological approach where you're not like like trying to beat somebody over the head with the idea. but
Hmm.
like you're better at using language. You're better at kind of building somebody's ego up, and understanding like a trigger. And
Hmm.
so you're not coming at somebody directly where they even think there's a threat or they think there's anything happening, and you can actually still get your way, but it doesn't seem outwardly aggressive.
Yeah, it's like in boxing. It's like a good counterpuncher. You know, everyone knows that someone might be aggressive, and an aggressive boxer is great, but the best tactic for an aggressive boxer is going up against a great counterpuncher, because then they just
Yeah,
use
or
their aggression against them.
like a
And
rope a dope, like
right, I mean, I think Ali, we could say that he's probably a strong individual, and yet, you know, he was a pretty tricky as well. He wasn't always like straight in your face. If he had gone
went
directly,
straight at you. Yeah, he would
yeah,
kind of get you into a lull, and then
hmm,
kind of come at you like unexpected. It's like strategy. Like if
right,
you can think like the general mindset, that somebody
hmm,
that isn't just looking at the first step. It's like a chessboard. They're thinking
right.
at multiple moves ahead, and you might not even be there, and they're already way ahead of you.
And he kind of had to, like, or you're not going to go at George Foreman straight ahead,
Like
right?
that,
I
like,
mean,
yeah, you can't go
not
straight
then,
ahead.
not even now. So, but
So it's interesting, when you started to, like, use, different methodologies, what types of, how did you come about building your methodologies? Is it just from practical experience or lessons learned, or you had some
y-
teachings, or, like, maybe you can
yeah,
tell the story?
yeah. So, you know, I started studying the different methodologies when I was pretty young, like probably when I was in my late teens, so 17, 18. I was like reading about, you know, the ones that everyone hears of Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, all those kind of methodologies. And I started using them. So I actually did follow them quite a bit. But as you do, then you start realizing, oh, there's like some issues here. Like I especially had a problem with introversion, extroversion. A lot of people would be like, yeah, it doesn't make sense because I'm extroverted in these situations, but I'm introverted in these situations. I'm like, I totally agree. That makes a lot of sense. It's based on the context. So there has to be another way to look at this that actually works. And that's where I go to the values thing. Like
Mhm.
someone who values something, like let's say Einstein, for instance. I think a lot of people might say Einstein's an introvert. Um, but if you get him in a situation where it really ties into his values, like if he was like at a conference talking about theoretical physics,
Chris
I bet
Miller,
you,
he's gonna be the leader.
yeah, he's going to be the person. He is going to be the top dog, and you're going to know it. So I started finding flaws in the methodology, and so I started creating my own. While I owned an education company for about a decade, and so we would have about 1,000 students a year. So I did not teach these 1,000 students. I had a select number of students, but I had a lot of teachers, and I would teach my teachers to use
Right.
this methodology. And as we would use it on every student, I started to develop it more and more. So it wasn't perfect when we first started, and
Like, so you just learn over time, like lessons learned. Like
right, yeah,
that's how you develop anything. It's like if you're an artist, like you got 100 demos before
oh
you
right,
get
yeah,
to the version that ends up getting to the world. And
hmm,
you can look at that as all of those failures. Like I never look at them as failures. It's like that's how I got to where the last step of the ladder, right? Then I actually this is the one that works. And it's
right.
like the process of getting there. That's fun to me. But some people find that like hard, or they don't value it. But the struggle is part of the lesson.
Yeah, it's like what's that? The stonecutter quote. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, where it's like there's a stonecutter hitting this rock over and over and over again, and then
Mhm.
it's like the 99th hit, it finally breaks, and then he's just like, yeah, but it
When he
was
breaks
all
it,
the ones
well, that's it.
before.
All the
Yeah,
ones before that set it up.
yeah,
You have to kind of set yourself up. It's like kind of like the muscle memory.
hmm,
If you're a musician, or you're an athlete, by the 10,000 hours to get the 3 point shot,
oh yeah,
10,000 hours to get the right chords. So it's like just muscle memory, and you don't have to think about it. And you're on your instrument, and you're just a master, like to master anything.
yeah. And
So
you don't
it's
have to, yeah, you don't have. That's the beauty is like you said, you're not really thinking about it. Like, and I'm all for like the practical intelligence or learning that way too. Like I grew up playing basketball and coached basketball, and also grew up playing the piano. So I definitely have that mindset of like, yeah, like you suck in the beginning, you're terrible at everything, right? And with sports, everything's happening quickly. with, you know, the piano, everything's wrong and you're never going to play really fast. But the more you do it, then, and the more you fail, then you just like pick up all these things, and then you don't even think about it. Then you just,
Yeah.
then you
But
just,
also when you get to the point where you kind of let go,
Mhm.
like a lot of times it's like I kind of believe it. I kind of don't like to read the sheets anymore. I just like to be in like in a flow state,
Mhm.
and where you kind of trust all the capability you've been playing for 20 years. You trust yourself and you kind of go with the muse, which means like you
Right.
can just like a fusion jazz guy. Somebody hits a note, even if it's unexpected, you know what to go, how to go with it. You don't go and say, let's start again. We
Right.
actually the actual missed note or no bad note is actually an opportunity. Like it's an opportunity to evolve the song and to kind of be in the present rather than thinking about the past so much that you're like, oh, I wrecked the song. Where you have this mindset, well, it's not a mistake, it's actually an opportunity.
Yeah, it reminds me of, you know, I think I mentioned off camera that my favorite band was Depeche Mode, and you know their favorite song is "Enjoy the Silence," and originally that was a ballad. Martin Gore wrote that as a ballad, and he's playing it, and then the drummer Alan Wilder said, "You know what?" And then he just started playing like a really upbeat rhythm, and then so then the guy just started singing faster, and then like, wow, this is actually pretty good. Yeah, let's keep it like this. Like, let's.
Yeah, sometimes what do we call the happy accident?
Mhm.
You could have something very, and I'm a software designer too. So I have like left, right brain. So my day job, I do software design, but there's a lot of happy accidents. There's a lot of
Mhm.
stuff we'll have a plan, and then we find something like a mad scientist, and we didn't expect it, and it's actually better than what we were working on. And then we say, well, this is actually an opportunity. And the thing is to be brave is like when you actually find that, do you actually go with it, or you say, oh, that's not in the plan, so I'm not going to go with it.
Right. Right. You have to be okay with like, yeah, changing the plan, you know,
Yeah,
and
some
adjusting.
people aren't good with changing the plan.
That's true. Certain personality types, but the nice thing is people can learn. It doesn't mean that it has to be their natural instinct. Like I'm always big, like personality types. I'm not trying to restrict people. I'm not saying you can never do this. It's just more about understanding who you truly are. And then once you do, you can go like, you know what? I know my natural personality type is kind of like, for me, my natural personality type is pretty disorganized and I don't always follow through all the time. But since I know that, I can consciously go, you know what? I'm going to do kind of borrow from other types who are good at following through. And maybe I can use some of their techniques. And I'm never going to be perfect at it,
Yeah,
but I might at
you
least
can
finish
focus.
half of
You
the
can
thing.
focus when you need to.
Yeah. I might do 50%, and 50% of finishing things is better than 10%, you know?
Yeah,
So,
you can ramp it up. You can ramp it up to a reasonable percentage so that you actually feel forward movement.
right. Yeah. Plus 40% is better.
Oh yeah, it's always well, I'm in software, so you make that kind of change. It's significant.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's still good.
Mhm.
That's a good shot. Like any day we have an improvement like that, we'd be like, that's a win.
Yeah.
How we have to to management,
Oh, yeah.
but it's interesting. Like the idea of like knowing your personality type and how it can affect your career. So like in terms of that context, do people come to you to try to actually that's the goal?
You know, the most, so I work with a lot of students, so they're just still trying to figure stuff out. Oftentimes, a lot of my students are like 16, 17 and getting ready for college. So that's a perfect time to be thinking about it. And I also work with adults who have been in a career and they hate it. And they're trying to figure out like what is wrong? Like I need to fix it. So it's kind of great because one feeds the other, right? Because like, and I'm not picking on parents, but a lot of parents have this idea sometimes that like, no, my kid is going to do this. They're going to have this approach and it's going to be linear and they're going to be a doctor.
A doctor, a lawyer.
Right. And I'm like, well, yeah, let me just tell you, I work with a doctor and he's miserable. And it doesn't mean that everyone is going to be miserable, but I'm just saying, like, it's not a guaranteed job that there's no guaranteed job that you're going to be guaranteed to love. You know, and if you don't know yourself, that's the problem. And so it's kind of nice to be able to work with people like adults who are at that stage because I can just tell the students, like, hey, I know someone who is where you want to be and they're miserable. And it seems like if you keep on this path of trying that out, you'll be miserable too because it doesn't seem to fit you. Like I have this story that I've been telling over New Year's. I was shucking oysters and I got my cousin's kid to help me. And we're talking about his life and he's just recently graduated pharmacy school. And I'm like, oh, so like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I don't know, but as long as it's a job that I don't have to be in the same place all day long. I'm
That's
like,
what a pharmacist is gonna
yeah,
do.
did you pick the wrong job? And the funny thing is, I already knew that going in. I remember when he first started pharmacy school, and I was like, hey, it's none of my business. I didn't say anything, but in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's a safe job, but he's not that personality. He's like the hustler personality. He's like the guy who,
He doesn't
right?
want to
He's
be in
going to
a
try different
drugstore all day. He doesn't want to be sitting behind the counter.
yeah. So, and so the funny thing is like, well, I told him like, hey, maybe you should do pharmaceutical sales, because pharmaceutical sales, that's a hustler job. You can travel, you're on the road. The better you do, you got to start from the bottom, but the better you do, there's a lot of room to grow, and you can be an executive eventually. And he's like, well, I don't want to waste the hour or the time I spent learning all this stuff. And then I said, you only have one life. Do you want to waste that doing something you don't want to do or you don't like doing?
You wasted more time.
Yeah.
20 years doing something you don't want to do.
Right. And so, and so I think that's a great example of like, you start early and just try to figure out what you want. And I went inside after checking these oysters, and his mom had came up to me and said, like, I'm surprised that he helped you with the oysters. And I'm like, why? Because I knew his personality, and his personality type is that kind of hustler, trying things and failing mentality. And if you have that personality, then they often like to use tools. And I'm like, that's perfect for him. Here's an oyster. Here's a tool. You do this, shuck, flip, instant gratification, And so, it was perfect.
Wow. So you were able to read him right away. That's interesting.
Well, I mean, he's family, so I've known him.
You knew him already, but I think, that's a really good story, because I think a lot of times, like you see during COVID, the Great Resignation, when people had all that time, they started to realize, like, well, I don't like being a road warrior. I don't like being in the home office all day long, and now I don't have to be there. And I was like, why not try something that people told me, well, that's a pipe dream, right? But a lot of people started looking at their pipe dreams and starting to like evaluate, like, if I'm not happy, like, why am I doing it? Like, what's the point? And so if you start to realize, what is their story? What did you really want to do? And if you feel like, well, now is the time to try it. A lot of times people get to that critical mass where it's like, oh, finally they've been pushed to kind of like, whoa, now I'm in the point where like I gotta do it now, because I'm not feeling it.
Yeah, I mean, once again, we only get one life, and once it gets taken away, we're not getting it back. And let's face it, in America, most of us here are pretty lucky in that we kind of have that luxury to be able to make those kinds of decisions where we're like, oh, like, let me pursue the things I want to pursue, and I have those opportunities where, other parts of the world, they might not have that. So it's kind of nice.
Be more like, you're pressured, like you're kind of stuck where you are because of the structure of the society, the economic structure leaves you like no room. You have no tools. You don't have the resources to actually set yourself up to the next thing, because like you have no capacity. Or maybe you just, sometimes you might still have it, but the mindset might have been pushed down in the structure of the society, the class structure, where you don't feel like you're going to get any help, so you don't think it's possible.
Yeah, here we have the time to reflect, and working with kids who are just about to go to college, it's a perfect time where I just asked them. I had a student, and I think I asked him, like, what do you want to do? Like, what are you thinking about? And all he said was business. I was like, okay, well, business, people tend to say that when they have a general idea of maybe trying things, right? And so I'm like, and I always say, like, close your eyes, and I want you to imagine yourself, like, what is your dream job? Like, what do you see? And then he said, sports agent or sports executive. I'm like, that's better. That's specific. We can work with
focused, more focused. Yeah.
Right. And it worked with what I knew about him. It was perfect. I was like, oh yeah, you'd be a great sports exec. He already knows some college athletes because he's just very friendly and they were his friends. And I was just like, wow, okay, this is great. Let's go with that. Another student said the thing he said was governor of North Carolina. I was like, that's perfect.
That's very specific.
Yeah, that's perfect. Maybe you don't become governor of North Carolina, but we know what path you're going to do. Maybe you end up being on some campaigns, or maybe a congressman, whatever. What we'll work towards is that, that's something that seems like that's close to your heart.
Yeah, you end up being a political. You figure it out. That's a lot. There's a lot of there's a lot of roles in that
Mhm.
world that you could get to be a power broker.
Right. You might not be governor of North Carolina, but I
You
just
could get
don't
behind the
want you to
scenes.
end. Yeah, I don't want you to end up being, a truck driver. Probably, if you want to be governor of North Carolina, truck driver, those are two different things. Two
Yeah, yeah.
different mentalities. Truck driving is great for certain people, but probably not if you want to be governor of North Carolina. It's different. So.
So, like over time, do you think do personality types change based on like age or different like points in your life that might not to do with age but just maturity level?
I always say, and I write in the book, and it's one of my favorite lines. Of course, I'm like fanboying my own line, but I don't think people change. And that's the number one question people have. Can you change your personality type? And I'm a big believer that people don't change, they can grow, though. And you can either grow into a better version of yourself or a worse version of yourself, right? So my goal is to help people grow into a better version of themselves. And I think that's if someone feels like their personality type has changed, I generally think if they didn't know who they really were.
Oh, they were just
And they're like,
misidentified who they were.
yeah, and they're starting to learn more about themselves, or vice versa. They might see someone like, oh, but they've changed. And I'm like, well, maybe your perception of them has changed because you're seeing parts of them that you didn't realize. And I think the right way to go because you don't want to think like you can change people because really what I found in my experience is when people say, oh, people can change, what they really mean is this person can change into something that I want them to be. It's like
Be
a parent saying,
more
yeah,
amenable to me.
parents are like, but they can grow into wanting to be a doctor. They can change. I'm like, well, okay, like they don't even like blood. Okay. Come on.
Yes, that's not
Like,
happening.
yeah.
But do you find that some people like think that like their personality is their career? Like they think like they are the doctor is who they are, but maybe the doctor is not who they
You
are.
know, I think a lot of people do because they haven't thought about, they haven't really self-reflected into who they are. So then they're just like, I do, that's what I am. I remember Charles Barkley had that great quote where he's just like, I'm not a basketball player. Everyone just looks at me and like, oh, Charles Barkley, the basketball player. He's like, I'm just a guy who plays basketball, but I got a
Mhm.
lot of other stuff, which makes sense. I mean, he is extremely interesting, which is why he's so great on TV. But yeah, I think sometimes people just get locked into that. Whereas I think that's why in my personality typing methodology, it focuses so much on values and less about skills, because I think a lot of these typing systems, they like to get people to buy into them because they're saying, oh, you're this type, so you're going to be good at this skill. And then if you tell someone they're good at something, they're never going to tell you, oh no, that's not me. They'll be like, oh yeah, yeah, like in the book I
Yeah,
write about it, where you're like, oh yeah, if you tell someone, hey, you have a penchant for being athletic, they might be the least athletic person in the world, but they're going to go back to that day when they tried out for the JV team and hit like 2 shots in a row, and like, oh yeah, I remember that time when I did that. I am athletic. So I think when we focus too much on skills and what we can do versus why we do them, I think that can be confusing for people. Um,
yeah.
so
For the why seems more important than the role because a lot of people get like hung up on the role.
right.
Like they're gonna be in this position, and it's like what is it that you want? Because I
Hmm.
mean, I always had this question is like somebody I want $1 million. Like, why do you want the $1 million? What is it that you think the $1 million is going to do? Like, if what is it that I want it to be security? Well, you might not need $1 million to have security, right? Or you wanted to have your own business. You might not take $1 million to have your own business. So, what is it
Right.
that you're actually trying to do?
Yeah, I was just talking to a student today, and I was talking about that, where it's like people have that focus on, like you said, money at $1 million, and it's like, well, at the end of the day, most people probably just want to be happy. And if you take a job to make a lot of money and it's not making you happy, then people will be like, oh yeah, but I can use the money to buy things that'll make me happy. It's like, why don't you just cut out the middle person and just find something that makes you happy and that you can like support yourself on, and
Yeah,
then
you can live at a different level. You don't have to live like what I find is like the people at the high level, they just get higher level problems.
yeah,
So
right, exactly.
you get the millionaire, you got $100 million, you got $1 billion, and they're still not happy. They're
Yeah,
still at the therapist. They don't like their family doesn't like them. Nobody likes them. They have all kinds of issues, hangups. It's like, well, it didn't work for them, did it? It's like that didn't really solve the issue.
I mean, that's what Biggie said, right? More money, more problems.
Yeah, it seems to
So
kind of really work come out that way.
yeah. So yeah, that's why I tend to focus more on trying to figure out the reason why you do something. It can also translate really well too. Like if someone says, "I want to help people, so I want to be a doctor," that makes sense. But if you have a difficult time being a doctor, that's okay. There's lots of other jobs where you can help people. You can be a teacher, you can be a nurse, you can be lots of different things. If let's say
Yeah.
you're afraid of blood, just knowing what you want and why you want it is really important to opening up your world as opposed to being so narrow-minded, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of advocacies that you can get into, like a lot of social causes you could go into, all kinds
Mhm.
of NGOs and all kinds of things that you can end up doing, having a lot of impact. Um, without, necessarily, oh, it has to be the surgeon. Well, you might not have surgeon level capability, but you still can have a big impact if you get with the right organization, or maybe you even create an organization because you start to have a passion.
Mhm.
If people follow their passions, they tend to be more aligned where they want to be, rather
Right.
than saying that passion. Oh, there's some kind of shame about the passion. Or you shouldn't want that because you should just be the accountant because that's what's respected.
Yeah, and some people like accounting and they like it.
Not to
And
put
all
it down, but
yeah, it's like you just gotta you just figure out what you want to do and not feel like you have to always like punish yourself by doing something that you don't want to do.
well, yeah, I mean, a lot of times if you get that business degree, you're going to end up into like actuarial accounting,
Mhm.
that kind of economics, and you might hate that, but that's the path you took. You went and got your MBA. You went on that track, and I've been in that kind of finance world of bank and insurance, and so many of the people that are sitting in the office, they don't even want to be there, but
Yeah.
they got stuck because they kind of believed in all the credentials they got, right? And those credentials that are on their name are actually kind of like an albatross around their neck.
Right, because it's almost like now I guess I have these, so now I have to do this because then I'm wasting it. And like
Yeah,
what my
like,
cousin
why
said,
did
that
you get all
wasting.
those and you're gonna dump them? Which it seems like a radical thing. And you get to some people who do, oh yeah, I'm not realigned with this anymore. But it's a hard thing because you aligned yourself with all those acronyms
Yeah.
on your name. And how do you get
And
out of that?
it's actually fits into the safety security thing a lot. I mean, all those acronyms make us feel safe and secure, right? Because it makes us feel important, and feeling important gives people a sense of security. But if you know that the reason why you're doing it is just because you want to have a certain amount of comfort in your life, then there's lots of avenues you can take that don't involve sitting in an office and being an actuary, where you have comfort. Maybe you want to be a chef and you want to like start your own restaurant and have like, not that that's super comfortable because that's pretty stressful, but like something where you're giving comfort to people. There's
Yeah,
lots of different options there.
there's a lot of ways that you can take, that nest egg and then use those, like, hey, at this point it served me to this point, and now this is where I pushed down my childhood aspirations because I thought I was told that's not realistic.
Mhm.
But now I'm like questioning, like, well, why did I push that down? And really, those things are what I'm dreaming about. So maybe I should try to actualize those things that I'm dreaming about all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, once again, you might not be governor of North Carolina, but you're probably going to, if you know that's what you want and why you want it, you're going to get somewhere close. You're going to get something where that's going to be close, meaning somewhere where it's going to make you happy.
More
So,
aligned with it. Like if you can get more aligned with what your aspirations really are, rather than what people are telling your responsibilities are. Right.
right.
So there's like a level, like, okay, well, you got to be able to feed yourself and clothe yourself and house yourself. But if you can get beyond like the bare minimums and your responsibilities and actually get closer to your dreams of what you actually feel you are. Because a lot of people, they start finding out, like, well, I'm not really aligned where where I want to be or who I am.
Yeah. And as long as you're also willing to put in the work, and that's what I always tell students, like this method is not easier. The
Mhm.
following your dreams is harder
Yeah,
because
it's hard.
you got to really go for it. But the nice thing is, it might not feel safe, but at the end of the day, life is not really safe anyway. You have all these people who have these degrees graduating because their parents told them to get good grades and listen to their teachers and do these things so that they could get a job. And then you have these people, once they graduate, these kids are like, okay, where's my job? And they're just like waiting for it to give it to them. And then their parents are like, well, you're supposed to work for it. And the kids are like, yeah, but you didn't tell me how to work for it. You told me if I did,
You're supposed to just get it.
yeah, you told me I'd get the corner office. And the nice thing about, thinking about what you want and going for that is that you never have that. There's never that assumption. You always know that once you leave college, it's going to be work.
But yeah, you got to show up. The thing is, like, it's very, a lot of times the arts it's very workmanlike in terms of there's a lot of work you put into it. All the hours of the practice and the repetition and the skills building up and the failures. Everybody always wants to act like it's an overnight sensation. And I've talked to CEOs, I've talked to entrepreneurs, I've talked to actors and musicians and authors. Like a lot of times, like, the first book didn't work, fifth book didn't work. It's the next day, then suddenly it's this thing work. It's like it's not giving up, it's showing up, it's actually learning, like lessons learned and willingness to explore and to, really address the impact of like, okay, why didn't this work? And not kind of beating yourself up, but like trying to learn, well, what aspects of this could still be valid, and it's that they kind of work. And it takes a lot of work to, it's not something they really say, you're not going to just win the lottery. You got to actually put the work in.
And that's why it's so important to enjoy and to know that that's what you want and to enjoy it, because you really, I guess, I mean, it's cliche to say, but you really do have to enjoy the process, because if you don't enjoy that process of like struggle and rejection, then it's not worth it. No reward at the end is worth it, because that reward might not come. So you might as well enjoy the process. Like you can't, don't become a dancer to make $1 million if you don't like dancing.
Yeah, it's like most musicians, they play because they love to play, and then opportunities it's like the law of attraction.
Mm-hmm.
If you show a passion, then other people see the passion, and you end up being able to work. And you might not be the biggest person in the world, but you might get opportunities that you can still be a working musician. You can still do it because you love it. And it's all because you loved it. I've seen a lot of people I started with, they just stopped. They never picked up the guitar, never picked up the bass, never picked up the sax. If they didn't get a certain goal at a certain time, it was like time dependent and they didn't reach it, then they never touch it again. And there's other guys, it's like they've been playing since they were 17, they never stopped. Whether they were successful or not, they still found ways to do it. And at whatever level they're at, they're kind of happy where they are. And I'm like, that's just understanding, like yourself. You have to understand, I guess, why you're doing it.
Right. I mean, if you're picking the bass guitar, I mean, anyone who wants to be like a bass guitarist, I'm going to tell them right now, you're not going to be Bootsy Collins or Flea. It's not. Sorry. But that's okay. Like, it doesn't, like, that's what you were saying before about not letting like the perfect, right? That idea of the perfect be the enemy of the good. And like, you have to, like, there's lots of different avenues you could do, and there's lots of different ways that can be like make you successful in life.
Yeah. When you think about like the punk aesthetic brought the idea, you didn't have to have a perfect pitched voice. You didn't have to play the guitar like Jimmy Page or Jimi Hendrix. If you came out like the Ramones or the Clash and you had passion, the passion in itself was the thing. And so there are different forms of music where you don't have to be the best. I mean, look at Lou Reed. He doesn't sing. Lou Reed was a poet, and he purposely did things that were discordant, that were noisy, that were kind of abrupt and outrageous on purpose, because he was more of a poet. But he found a way. He initially started in '66 with the Velvets, never went anywhere. Then suddenly in the '70s, David Bowie found him and Walk on the Wild Side. The same ideas he had in '66 suddenly worked because Bowie was a fan of his stuff with the Velvets and he loved it. It didn't sell, but Bowie personally actually had listened to that stuff and thought Lou was like amazing, was like in awe of Lou Reed. And Lou Reed wasn't making any money.
Yeah, I mean, and there's people who like, I mentioned like I have a lot of random allusions in the book and pop culture references. And there's one, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Eva Cassidy, but she's that great singer, and she never made any money, and she's such a great voice, and you listen to her, and I think she only did shows like in Baltimore, I believe, where she's from. But that's who's to say that's not a successful life? I'm sure she had a great life, and enjoyed it while she could. And I think
Yeah,
that,
sometimes like you might not have an impact in your time. Like William Blake, the great Victorian poet.
mhm,
Nobody found his work until he was gone. It was in a barn and he actually etched it in metal. So all the songs of innocence and experience were etched in metal. And those poems are actually on plates with artwork.
mhm,
He was found, and people realize he's from the Victorian age, but he was not famous during the Victorian age. He was famous as a Victorian age poet after he was gone.
right. No, I mean, I know I love Blake, and it doesn't mean that he didn't enjoy his time when he wasn't famous. I'm sure he enjoyed his time because I know he was also a nudist, so
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm sure he enjoyed that.
But
Uh,
it's interesting to say, but he felt the presence of mind to put it in metal, even though he
for a
couldn't
while.
market it. They were these plates. And so it lived beyond him. It wasn't just on paper, so people found it and he became important because he had the presence of mind. It's like, this is important for enough for me to etch in metal.
Yeah,
I
that is
don't
smart.
have a plan to market it, but I'm going to put it in metal because I'm going to put it and show somebody I was here.
Yeah, kind of like Emily Dickinson. Even though she didn't put it in metal, she hid all those her poems in like crevices in the
Yeah.
home. You know,
Yeah. Like, that you want to put it into the world. Right.
right,
So you're not scared, at least trying to put it into the world with whatever your capability is, but realizing that it can be in the world.
right.
So it's been great talking to you, and we end up talking a lot of far-ranging ideas. But if people click on your utopiaproject.com, can you tell people what happens when they go to your website?
Yeah, so if you click on that link right there, down there, it'll take you to. I don't know why I have two websites. I have two websites. One of which is mainly more focused on the ideas and a lot of articles, and that's the website that'll take you to. But that link will take you to take the assessment.
Hmm.
So basically, you can find out what personality type you are. I use animals, so you'll find out which one of the 16 animals that you are. Some are more appealing than others. My animal personality type, the animal is not that appealing, so don't get mad at me if your animal is not appealing because mine is not either. But some people get the fox. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a fox. I love it. So there's some that are just like a little bit more appealing. But and from there, then if you want to learn more from what you learned about yourself from just that website and the links, then buy my book, The Power of Personality. You can see it right over my left shoulder there.
You can get
And
that
that'll
everywhere.
also,
Can you
you
get
get
that at
that.
Amazon or just your website?
You can get that everywhere. Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever you buy books, I guess they say. You can get it there, and that book will teach you how to understand people better and actually how to type them as well. So I always
Hmm.
say that too when you're taking a test. Even my tests, I spent a lot of time creating my tests, but it's still just a test. It's still a standard test. Nothing is more accurate than your own instincts and your own intuition. And if you read my book, that'll help you master those, or at least sharpen those, and it'll help you type better. So,
Well, I think it's very worthwhile to understand your personality and apply it to your life to really take a gut check, kind of like the poets used to say. I'm into the Victorian poets, but the looking glass self analysis, which
mm,
seems to be kind of consistent with what you're doing here, is something I was always into. But I like the way you're approaching it is in a more methodology. It's more practice than that's like the poetic concept of it. But
it's a little more structured than poetry, but
yes,
the book is fun. So hopefully, when people read it, like they'll know that there's a lot of random references. I reference Biggie before, and I reference Biggie in the book. Like there's just a lot of allusions to things because I feel like it's theory. Well, first off, I'm not a huge fan of just theory. As I mentioned before, I like practical knowledge and things coming from experience. But I'm
mm-hmm.
also, I don't try to take anything
Relatable.
too
Well, you
seriously.
want to make it relatable, and so
Right.
it's like not just for people who've taken, the courses and have a degree. Like
Right.
if your book is just meant for those people, well, it's going to hit a certain level. If you want it to actually appeal to the wider world, you have to be more open with your language.
Exactly. And also, like as a writer, we're taught you got to just use your voice, right? So that's my voice, and my voice. I wasn't even a great student in school, so I don't even know how I got my degree. So it's definitely not. It's not on display in this book, but the insights are on display in the book. So
With how you apply things, in life, and if you were able to figure out how to make things teachable, that to me is like, then you're actually having an impact. If you can teach, you can
Mhm.
kind of do that where you're actually, helping your fellow human being with
Yeah.
understanding the world. That's always a great thing. And I appreciate you being a guest on the Family Electric Coach podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Have a good night.
You too.